Beyond the Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostick alongside Katie Greifeld. We're counting you down to the closing bell, and here to help take us beyond the bell, it's a global simulcast, joined right now by our very good friend, Madison Mills. Just met and filling in today for Carol Massar. Welcome to our audiences across Bloomberg Television.
The compliments just pour out of you, Romaine.
Absolutely.
Call me Jess or Maddie. It makes me sing. And
I love you, Carol Massar.
I know you do. And
I love our audiences across all of our platforms. Unfortunately, I'm not sure there's a lot to love here in the equity markets here.
No.
Basically red across the screen right now for all the major indices.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to get into the industry groups in a little bit. You guys have been talking about it. We've been talking about it. We just talked with George Ferguson of Bloomberg Intelligence, the airlines, because of that American Air news pre-announcing, continue to be down almost 4%, Maddie, in today's trade.
Yeah, but then you also look at the consumer more broadly, right? Bank of America this morning in one of their notes saying that they're really concerned that consumer spending lags could create real risks heading into Q2. As we go into earnings, Katie, I'm going to be really looking at those consumer discretionary stocks.
Well, we get a hint of the earnings season on Friday. Of course, the big banks kick us off. It's going to be interesting to hear the C-suite commentary about what the state of this economy looks like. Obviously, those big bank CEOs have a unique perspective on the consumer.
Yeah, and just going back really to that airline, because I think the American Airlines thing really spooked a lot of people. Because they, on one hand, they're basically saying, hey, we expect demand to hold up. But then on the other hand, they're basically saying that, well, passenger purchasing behavior is shifting. So I'm not quite sure what that means, but I think it means that maybe they're going to not be buying as expensive of tickets as they were.
That's exactly what George Ferguson said of Bloomberg Intelligence. Not enough demand to fill up those higher fares. That's what's going on.
A pretty volatile day here in the broader markets as we get the closing bell. Here in New York, over on the Dow Jones Industrial Average, we're down roughly about 39 points as we wait for the numbers to settle. That's down about 0.1% on the day. The S&P 500, which had been in the green, is going to close in the red, down by 17 points or 0.4%. The Nasdaq Composite down by about 0.9%, and the Russell 2000 closing out the day, Carol, down by 0.7%.
Am I missing something? VIX unchanged here, it looks like today. As we talk about these tight ranges when it comes to equity trading and the Treasury trade, the VIX also unchanged at 19, essentially, and change. Having said that, in the S&P 500, more names to the downside, Katie, about 323 to be exact.
And you can see that on the industry group level as well. Definitely more red than green. If you look at what was green, it was pretty defensive. You have capital goods up there as well as household products. Then you go down the list all the way to the bottom. It was autos leading the charge to the downside, nearly down 3%. A lot of that coming from Tesla. But Carol, the chips too, also underperforming today, down nearly 2% or so. It's been a difficult couple of days for the chip sector.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's get to some of the individual gainers in today's session. A little tough going, at least looking at some names. The cloud sector, I talked about it earlier. We definitely did see that group rallying. Datadog up about 3%, top of the NASDAQ 100. Remember, we saw the selling off yesterday on that UBS call, some concerns about Microsoft's Azure computing business and cloud business. So we did see some selling yesterday, but we saw investors moving back into the space today. Also want to mention Pioneer Natural Resources, PXD is the ticker. It's up about 2.1% here. In the news a lot, as you know. Stock has gained around 8-9% since that Wall Street Journal report that Exxon has held some preliminary talks about an acquisition. But I thought it was interesting. Earlier, this was top in the S&P 500, so a little standout there.
And just to add to that, too, I saw you have Fortive on there, but I think it's interesting. We did see a lot of activity, at least a lot of reporting about potential deal activity today.
It's interesting, right? Amid all the uncertainty that is still going on, that companies are at least talking about it and potentially maybe looking to pull a lever. Fortive, you mentioned, top in the S&P 500, heavy volume, up about 2.7% by the close. A headline last night, Emerson said to have beat Fortive in the competitive process. They were bidding for National Instruments. Another media outlet talking about for Fortive, if they had done the deal, maybe the debt exposure to it. So anyway, investors liking that maybe they didn't get it.
And we should point out Triton was up more than 30% on the back of that Brookfield deal that we were reporting on earlier.
Yeah, deal flow, you're right.
Yeah, and we've got some big headlines on some of these decliners coming through. American Airlines closing 9% lower on the day after warning quarterly profits likely to fall short of Q1 estimates. That's amid those persistently high costs. And as Carol was mentioning earlier, we talked to BI's George Ferguson, who looks at airlines really closely, and he said the lack of consumers' demand for those higher fares is what's really killing some of these airlines. And part of that is because of the lack of return to business travel, and that's where you see a lot of demand for those first class tickets and upgrades. Then we go down to...
And don't forget, we get Delta Airlines tomorrow morning.
Yes, yes. And I asked him what he's going to be looking for on those earnings calls, and he said those airfares and demand for those expensive airfares really critical. Cirrus Logic here down 12%, biggest drop since 2021 on that news that Apple may be changing its design. That could impact Cirrus and really everyone within Apple's supply chain. And I've got to end with Abercrombie & Fitch. We were all impacted by this company in high school, struggling to maintain its margins amid inflation and currency headwinds. Again, really looking at that consumer spending. Is the consumer buckling to the red-hot inflation that we've been seeing, even though this morning maybe we get some news that that inflation is dipping a little bit?
Yeah, and we saw a lot of apparel makers are really moving lower here on the day, including Gap, Abercrombie, American Eagle, even the big box stores like Target moving lower as well. There was a lot of activity today in the Treasury space, a lot of sort of oscillations, if you will. There was a big drop down in yields after we got that CPI report, but that sort of corrected itself. We did still move lower by about 5 basis points on the 2-year yield, back below 4%, down 3 basis points on the 10-year yield. The action on the longer end of the curve, particularly with the 20-year and 30-year, Katie, was a little bit more muted.
And I think it's so interesting to look at the intraday action. To your point, you did see yields initially drop and then come back after the CPI print, but it was the Fed minutes from last month's meeting that was the bigger impetus today. I would not have expected that.
Yeah, I think getting some clarity maybe about what internally is going on at the Fed, specifically among the Fed members as well as the Fed staff in terms of what they're seeing later in the year. And I feel like we need to kind of do a drinking game of how many times we kind of hear recession at this point. Works for me, you guys. But I'm just feeling like the momentum is picking up at this point.
No, it's so true. The calls for recession really picking up here. And I think you bring up the great point, Katie, that the equities market and the Fed may just continue to disagree with one another. We saw that in the CPI print this morning and then again in this afternoon.
Just want to get you some breaking news here. Let's start off here with Rent the Runway, a smaller stock to be sure here. They are reporting earnings. The forecast, though, not looking good. And the shares taking a leg down here. Their first quarter forecast looking at revenue of about 72 to 74 million. That's pretty much on the nose here. But for the full year, coming in very light, 320 to 330 million is the forecast they're giving for revenue. The street on average was looking for about $345 million in revenue. The shares taking a leg down by more than 10% here in after hours trading.
Yeah, seeing a bunch of selling. I do also want to mention some headlines coming from Harley Davidson talking about a CFO transition, announcing that Gina Getter, I hope I'm saying it correctly, will step down as CFO at the end of April 2023 to accept an opportunity outside the company, and they're going to start that formal search process for the next CFO. David Vinny will be the interim CFO at this point. I'm just looking to see if the stock's moving here in the after hours.
It's only down about a percent here on the day, but it's interesting. We've been talking a lot on the show about just all the CFO transitions that we've seen over the last few months. A lot of CFOs just kind of throwing in the towel and saying there are better opportunities out there. It's a challenging time if you're a CFO of a big company.
We've just had somebody on in the search management space, and they said that they have got a lot of requests for kind of temporary CFOs that a lot of companies need it. So it's definitely underplay. I agree with you. A lot of pressures.
And just real quick too on Gina, we don't know where she's going, but we should point. There's been a lot of speculation about her and her. I guess the potential for her to take on a bigger leadership role, i.e. CEO. She's got a lot of experience. It'll be interesting to see where she lands.
That would be interesting because, I mean, in our conversations, Romaine, when you think about sort of where a CFO can go, it's mostly to another CFO job. You don't often see the move from CFO into CEO. So it'll be an interesting story to watch.
Well, the role. Go ahead, Romaine. Go
ahead.
I
was just going to say, she's had like 3 or 4 CFO. I mean, she was at General Mills, she was at Tyson, then at Harley. So I mean, she's been around the block on the CFO side. Like I said, there's been a lot of speculation about a lot of people looking to her for a bigger leadership role.
No, it's true. And it also just feels like the definition of the CFO role has really changed, right? It's not the same as it was when we had a zero interest rate environment. Now it's a completely different ballgame out
Well,
there.
and I would say it goes all the way back to the financial crisis. Like those CFOs kept those companies alive, if you will. We saw it for, during the pandemic. And I think at some point they're so involved, Katie, in strategy and figuring out where money should be spent and making sure that costs are kept in line, that I think it's an exhausting job at this point. And that's why you do see a lot of movement. And you actually do see a fair amount of CFOs increasingly moving into that CEO step.
Yeah, and you don't get the glory in the way that the CEO does either. You get all
That's
the
why
work.
you want it.
You still get a C
Yeah.
at the front of the title.
Did you guys see that we finally have a rat czar in New York City and they're going to be paid
It's me, actually.
$155,000?
I'm the rat
I know,
czar.
Katie, I was like, where is your name and the redhead on the
But I'm curious. I saw this. First of all, she has an interesting backstory.
She's got
But they're only paying her $155,000. I feel like the rat czar
I'd
should
do
be
it
like
for
the highest
free.
paid position in this city
know.
because we got a lot of rats.
I would pay for the opportunity to be the rat czar.
You would pay for the
If
opportunity?
you got paid per, rat capture, can you even say that? Is that bad?
No.
Is PETA going to call me or something? All right, we got to wrap. We got to wrap.
Nice.
We will see you.
No one's stopping you.
True. We could all do it.
Yeah, they'll just shut off the mics in like 2 seconds. All right, guys, we got some earnings coming our way tomorrow, and of course PPI. So that's a wrap on our cross-platform coverage. We call it Beyond the Bell, radio, TV, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals. We'll see you tomorrow.